Yeah, if we say a little bit about how maybe our way of working differs from other people's ways of working, which really takes us to exploring very simply the history of crystal therapy, which isn't as long as you would think if you ignore the rantings about Atlantis and whatever, just for the moment. The crystals have always been, or rocks, or anything pretty and shiny and expensive and rare, has always been used and sought after by everybody in the world who can access rocks and shiny things that are valuable. So it's something that humans have always done. Now, if you're a cynic, you can say, well, that's because we just like shiny things. And Lyle Watson wrote a very good book about human beings liking shiny things. And as a biologist, he's got a very nice take on it. But it may well be, and it would be what crystal therapists would say, is that there is an energetic reason why crystals and rocks and shiny things are attractive to us. In the past, really the only accessible stones have been things that have been found in small caves or washed down from mountains and rivers. So the natural gemstones tended to be river tumbled stones, river tumbled diamonds, rubies, whatever. So only certain parts of the world would tend to have a wealth of precious stones. For example, India, Sri Lanka, and those places were naturally abundant in rubies, sapphires, whatever. A lot of the rest of the world really had lumps of quartz and river-washed quartz and things like turquoise occasionally popping up here and there. So gemstones, until really the 1980s, were a rare commodity. Basically, they were precious and they were mined, either mined or picked up from river deposits. And the ones that were sold and of most value were the hard stones that could be hard enough to wear without breaking and shattering and what have you. So the rubies, what we call the gemstones, were the stones that were most highly prized and most used. The softer stones and imitation of those precious stones, so for example lapis lazuli was very high quality and expensive in Egypt, and so was turquoise. But for the minions who couldn't afford the actual precious rock, then they would make imitations from glass, or they would use other stones which would simulate more expensive stones. But basically, it was really only in the 18th, 19th centuries when the intellectual aristocrats would sort of saunter down the mines and buy interesting, bizarre stuff off the miners, who would go in for real things like tin, coal and whatever, and really they would only pick out the crystals because they could sell them to some rich aristocrat when they got up to the surface as a curiosity. That it's only then that mineralogy and other sorts of minerals became interesting and known about. So basically all of the history of crystals has been the gemstones, the precious minerals. And it's important to remember that, because these days there are so many more types of crystals and stones available, simply because the market's there. It's all market led. The sensation, the feeling of precious shiny things is constant, but it's just what is accessible and what has been, as Sue said, that list in the back of the directory, the list of invented names and alternative names for duff stones, or stones that have got funny names, and you know, it tends to be market led, because it's always to do with, there's always a value, and it's always not a material value, it's a spiritual value that has been attributed to stones. They are there to bring virtues in, and they've always been used to bring virtues and qualities into the individual that are desired. So the magical use of gemstones has always been there. If you want wealth, success, money, men, women, whatever, there is a stone that has got a tradition of bringing that quality to you. And that's exactly what we see today in the market. It's tended to go and get a bit more sophisticated and use longer words, but health, wealth and happiness has now become ascension, increased consciousness and psychic powers or whatever. Now, it's still the same thing. It's still that basic feeling, intuition that this shiny object with this bright colour is bringing something into my energy that I require and that I need. So there's that level of biological, non-intellectual, like, wants, pretty, shiny, good, mine, not yours. and that's on the level of material acquisition and beauty and enhancement of life. But it's not really healing therapy side. The only records of healing therapy with stones come from the shamanic traditions of using quartz, usually quartz, and sometimes other stones, for changing consciousness, for opening the intuition to other information from other places, and for identifying illness. The clarity of clear quartz has that thing that this is a weird thing.
Everything else but
clear quartz. So clear you can't even see it. It's something solid and you can see through it. Remember that in most of the history of humanity we haven't had plastics and we haven't had glass. So things that are solid that you can see through is not something that you can put into a context of ordinary life. It's an extraordinary thing to have something that's in the ground, picked out of the ground, and it reflects like stars or like the planets or like the sky. It's a magical thing. So the healing or the healing qualities of stones tended to reflect something that was going on at subtle levels of the psyche or the intuitive awareness of those practitioners who were used in every society for healing or whatever. So if you look, it is frustrating, but it's quite worth doing. If you look back at all the records of the use of crystals in a specific healing context, that's what you come back to. You come back to quartz crystal, clear quartz crystal, clear quartz pebbles being used for divination, i.e. identifying information that is not readily available, and healing or clearing energy. So where the hell did crystal therapy come from in that case? Well, it largely comes from the other main tradition of use of gemstones, and this is use of high quality precious gemstones from Ayurveda in Vedic Himalayan India. Now the system of Ayurveda includes all sorts of methods and technologies for balancing and healing the individual. But a fairly big part of Ayurveda is Jyotish, which is astrological linking, and the use of gemstones to balance astrological influences. So in the Ayurvedic system of using gemstones for healing, specific colours and qualities of stones were precisely linked to this planet. It was really just planets.
Yeah, and the nodes of the moon.
And the nodes of the moon, which were conceived of as being equal to planets. And they were cut very precisely with mantra, with chant, with ritual, of the highest quality and the highest quality weight, and were worn to counteract or to enhance negative, positive qualities in the individual. So that's a clear reference that feeds both the magical traditions of Arabia and Europe, wear this and it'll make you better, and also the healing aspect of therapy, wear this and it will counteract the negative influences and will repair. So that's the sort of the Ayurvedic tradition balanced out the magical with the healing aspect. All the information about birthstones and month stones and that sort of stuff originates from the Ayurvedic system of planet and rock, ruby, sun, moonstone, moon, da 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 da, but was expanded and played around with as more stones became available, or stones availability changed.
Yeah. And basically, 1923, at a big jewelers' conference in America, the birth months and the ordinary months, in other words, the signs of the zodiac, but also ordinary months, were ascribed certain crystals because and certain stones because they needed to sell the semi-precious stones, and the only way they could think of doing it was expanding the traditional into what was actually available. So the idea that if you're Aquarius you should wear amethyst or garnet or something like that is not something that's ancient at all. It's something that was put together in the 1920s to sell stones other than times like Christmas, when people would go and buy. They had to create, this is a story of capitalism, they had to create the market when there wasn't a natural market. And this is how they created it. So, and of course the trouble is it's come down into Joe Blogg's thinking that, that...
regardless of whether you like the stone or
not, it's your birthstone, so you wear it, and it's important to realise it's a man-constructed thing. That part of it, it's not a traditional thing. I said the real traditional stuff was the real high-end bits and pieces, and so this is the start of this process from the 1920s, the start of the process of things broadening out.
Now that it's pretty difficult to trace the origins of the concept of modern crystal therapy, but you can see it coming together at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, when a lot of Himalayan and North Indian sacred or semi-sacred texts were being translated by the Theosophical Society, and the ideas of the chakra system and yoga and all the systems of the Himalayan area were fed into the already existing idea of correspondences of body parts, planets, astrological signs that were carried through from classical times, Arabic times, into medieval Europe. The magical tradition of correspondences between colours, plants, stones, rocks, times of the day, those things, the linking between yellow things, the lions, rubies equals sun energy. So the theosophical translators of the Indian texts met with the magical and metaphysical traditions of medieval Europe, and eventually boiled down to a simple format of 7 senses of the body. Now that's interesting. 7 senses of the body, 7 chakras, or 6 actually in most, but make it nice and round number 7, because then we can have 7 days of the week, 7 colours of the rainbow,
7 known planets at the time.
7 known planets, and it makes nice correspondences. So that sort of mixing of and boiling down of those two traditions really happened in the 50s and 60s. and started coming out in mainly American metaphysical texts in the 70s. Once you've established that you've got these weird 7 spots on the body in a rainbow pattern, then it becomes easy to think, well, if we've got stones of those colours, then we can balance out the energies of those centres. But actually, the earliest books on crystals and crystal healing tended to be ones that, again, they shows a split, that came from a vague and undefined Native American source, mainly using quartz crystals. So there are a few books saying, ooh, quartz crystals, good healing. Them Indian fellas, they use good. And then the other books that were coming out at that time tended to follow the tradition of this stone is good for this stone is good for this will cure this will cure this. And basically that's still the split of textbooks of crystals. You get the books that tell you what things to do with rocks, and the other books will tell you the properties of the rocks. And they're sort of not really, they don't always mesh together. So, when I started becoming interested in rocks, it was because of that damned kinesiology. Because on a course I was doing, we had a play around with a few rocks that were lying around in somebody's sitting room and testing how the energies were with people, and it was like interesting because some people were strong with this rock and some people were weak with that rock and strong with that. So you think, oh, that's interesting. There's definitely an energetic thing going on here. But then I spent endless times in bookshops referring to different books and seeing, let's check up what this book says about turquoise. And trying to find some consistency was actually fairly difficult. And so you think, oh God, what they're saying is not clearly a consistent pattern of information. So nowadays it is slightly easier to see connections between different sources, mainly because a lot of them are copying off other people, but also because the knowledge about colour is much more broadly understood. And basically, if you understand the colour information of a rock, then you know broadly what effects it's going to have.
If you know a little bit else about what the actual rock, as I say, anatomically, it's not atom-wise is made of, you'll also have some idea, and we've given you those in the back of your directory. And so you can build up an idea of this crystal does what or potentially does what without having to go to somebody else's directory.
So what was happening in the 80s was that there were 1 or 2 books that were mainly by spiritual healers, talking about using quartz to balance the chakras or to balance the energy fields, the aura, and then a whole range of other books which says use this stone for gastric enteritis, use this stone for clubfoot, use this stone for whatever, but not saying anything. It wasn't actually giving instructions.
For what to do with
dance around on the full moon on one leg, holding the stone in the air. It didn't give, and a lot of books are still like that. They'll give you a whole raft of information about what a stone does at a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, trans-spiritual, global level. But then it'll say, use intuitively. So it isn't actually giving any practical advice to people to know how to use stones to heal. So the 2 strands of healing developed really from those sort of roots in the 80s. And the 2 strands basically were spiritualist side and physical therapeutic side. Okay. So the spiritual healer side tended to emphasise, and they still do, the schools that still emphasise the spiritual healing sort of healing, they tend to emphasise the fact that crystals are amplifying the healer's own energies. So they're just a means to wrap up the energy that the healer is giving to the client. the sort of work that developed in the 80s and 90s, in which we moved along as well, was the fact that it's the rocks, the stones themselves that are doing the work, and it's the fact that we as therapists are just there to move the rocks around. We're not actually inputting our energy. Now, both those systems are effective, but each one requires different ways of working and with different parameters of safety and use. Because Sue and I both learnt kinesiology and other sorts of technique that are client-led, we check what is required for the person and do the work in that way.
So we don't follow a set menu.
It allows us to tailor precisely to the individual. Now, the tendency of the spiritual type of healer is that they come in a cloud of glory with their guides and angels and whatever, and do the work. And there's a lot of energy there, and the stones and rocks can amplify that. But the danger of that work is that it's a much more entangled process, where the person working can get lost like jamming, or it's like jamming. It's great to jam with music, it's great fun, it's an enjoyable experience. But if you're outside listening to it, it can sound like rubbish. And it's the same with. It can be the same, not always the same. It can be the same if you don't have enough checks and balances in working wholly intuitively or in a spiritual healing way, because you get involved with the feeling of the process and, oh, this is great, and isn't this wonderful, this is doing this and this is doing that. It's an enjoyable experience, but it isn't necessarily the best healing experience. And we're not here to supply entertainment. We're here to get not just entertainment. I mean, if coloured rocks are good. Coloured rocks. People like coloured rocks. They'll do anything for coloured rocks. You can do anything if you've got a bunch of coloured rocks. Compared with something like homeopathy, which is dull as ditch water. I mean, it's great stuff, but it's not enjoyable, is it, to go into a homeopath, larting out and answering silly questions and then just getting little white tablets at the end. So the enjoyment of a crystal therapy session is important, but the main thing is that the life is changed afterwards. I mean, if homeopathy didn't work, it would have died out years ago, because it's so boring. It's not an enjoyable experience. It only carries on because it works. Yeah. We've got the advantage in that crystal therapy works, and it's also enjoyable to do and play around with shiny rocks. So, what the way that we teach and the way we work is we give structure. You can feel confident about what you're doing because it's very simple, and you do this and you do that and you do that. But within that structure, there is flexibility that allows you to modify and grow and change what you're doing. It's no good saying, we're all intuitive beings, we're all linked to the universe and we can do whatever we like because we're in tune with everything. Because at some level, yeah, that's right. But at ordinary level, no, it's not right, because we've got our own barriers, our own limitations, our own doubts about our capabilities. And it's those limitations and capabilities that cause all the problems in our lives and all the problems in our clients as well. So what we need to do is we need to have a confident system we can settle into, that we don't need our heads. ICGT Crystal Therapy, you don't need your head. You don't need your intellect. You don't need reasons at all. Because we teach you ways that you know for certain is going to work, and you've checked it's going to work, and you've checked it's appropriate in a non-intellectual way. And this is really the difference in some respects between the two strands of crystal healing, crystal therapy.
You're done.
It is important, because we've been teaching this system since 1991, and you tend to forget that has not been the mainstream way of teaching crystal therapy, crystal healing. It's the spiritual healers and the sort of simple balancing chakras and laying lots of stones on. How many stones have you got? Slap them on. Leave them there for 2 hours. They'll feel great afterwards. Their life will collapse and they'll have huge healing crises, but it'll be a lovely thing. It'll be a great experience. And that's the sort of thing that we, as kinesiologists, we sort of balk at that sort of overdose of stuff. We do the minimum required.
But the body can process.
The body can process in the quickest time, and rather than leaving somebody to baste and cooking crystals for hours on end, we go in, do a ninja job, come out, go away, come back later. So what we teach is a series of short techniques that you can put together in any way appropriate to the individual that will lead them to a healing balance that is not going to stir up more shit than it's actually resolved. Because this is the problem with a lot of intuitive and deep level stuff that doesn't have checks and balances, is that you think, oh, this is good stuff, we're getting to really meaty stuff now. But it's too much for the body to process. If you stir up a muddy pool and you keep on stirring it, it's never going to settle. What you need to do is you need to suck up a bit of mud now and then without disturbing the clarity of the water. And basically that's the sort of crystal therapy that we teach, and we would like you to learn too.
The practical sessions we'll be doing a lot. They are real sessions.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, there's nothing pretending going on here. They are geared to help yourselves for your body to heal. Okay? Which is one of the reasons why we teach them the way we do, and like today is going to be a gradual build up before we really start getting a little bit more focused and a little bit more precise. And it's also why it's so important that the grounding, the keeping yourself well, enough nutrition for your body to be able to process stuff. Okay? Because if you read anything about Professor Hyland from Plymouth University, who we've worked with a couple of times, has written a fantastic paper called Love, Entanglement and Being. And it's on our site on the course site for download, but I can bring hard copies in if anyone wants. And it basically is that if somebody comes to you as a client and you're in therapist mode, you cannot stop the healing happening, because that interaction happens even before you've actually met for a session. That process is already going on. I mean, when I was working, with my busy client base, people will sometimes say, well, I know I was booked to come with you on Thursday, but Wednesday it all happened. And that's me looking through my list thinking, I've got so on Wednesday. And obviously at that point my consciousness was going, and their consciousness was saying, I'm seeing Sue, and actually the stuff was going on. And it's realising that that you can't block that. It is part of the natural process. And it's quite interesting, when we first spoke to him, he explained his idea that it actually didn't matter which therapy you did. It was whether the link was right and the intention was right and the willingness to accept of the client's body to actually make the changes.
There's no such thing as a bogus therapy.
And
if there's an acquiescence of the desire to heal and the environment that allows that process, the body will do it. It's only the body that's doing it. Everything else is just offering support or encouragement, whatever system you're using.
And when he said this to us, we said, we go along with that, we understand that. And he said, really? He said, you're the first therapist we've spoken to who actually got even a vague handle on what's going on. He's spoken to a lot of people who trained for many, many years, and couldn't believe that they weren't the instigating factor to the person's healing. And it's like, whoops. So it was quite good actually for us, and we actually end up with a very good relationship with somebody who's actually in quite a powerful position to at least put some balanced stuff out there about how complementary and alternative therapy works. But it's really interesting to understand that, and that's why us all coming together for this course this week, there will be other layers of stuff going on, not just be what we're actually doing here. There will be other stuff going on.